Now, you reportedly sent an email earlier this month saying that Assistant HUD Secretary Suzanne Tufts, who received a Senate confirmation, would be leaving HUD to serve as the acting Inspector General at the Department of Interior. That, of course, oversees the investigations into Secretary Zinke. Now the Interior Department is saying that's not the case. So what's going on here?
Well, we appreciate the tremendous contributions Suzanne Tufts made both at HUD and to our nation in general. She has submitted her resignation. It has been accepted, and we wish her the very best in the future.
So is she going to the Department of Interior to be the Inspector General, the acting Inspector General?
I have no information on that. I just know that she has submitted her resignation here at HUD, and we hope the best for her.
Okay. Switching gears, the Rental Assistant Demonstration Program, or RAD as it's commonly referred to. This is a private-public partnership. It also is bipartisan. It recently reached a new milestone of $6 billion worth of investment. Talk to me a little bit about what specifically this program will do.
Well, it's spectacular. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was down in Texas. We were celebrating the 100,000th conversion from a public housing unit to a RAD unit. And basically what this is, Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, permits private capital to be invested in public housing with some ownership transfer. And you can take care of the tremendous backlog of capital needs. It's estimated to be about $35 billion. Through the RAD program, almost $6 billion in private funding has been realized to renovate and rebuild public housing and transfer the ownership. And, this is a perfect solution to the traditional thinking about what public housing is.
Right.
By bringing the private sector in, you create an incentive for them to maintain the properties in a very good shape, because it means a lot for their income.
Secretary Carson, I want to follow up on that, because it is interesting, because when we talk about home development, we often talk about high-end models, but you're making the case that the private sector ought to really get into and help to invest in low-income and affordable housing. Why is that important?
Well, I think it's important because the old model was the federal government coming in with a bucket of money, building these big multiple-story buildings with density of poor people and very little in the way of care. By having the private sector getting involved, not only are they creating a continued income stream, but they are creating a neighborhood. They're creating an environment that's nurturing and that's helpful and that people are proud to live in. And I think it makes all the difference in the world.
And President Trump has expressed concerns about the Federal Reserve raising interest rates and that's impact on the economy. Do you think that that's going to have any impact on the home buyers?
Well, obviously, it will have an impact in the sense that if you raise the price on anything in a substantial way, it's going to go up. But, for a very long time, we were in a very abnormal situation with zero interest rates. And, people have basically forgotten what normal interest rates are and how to react to them. That's going to change, obviously, and everything will rebound.
Well, do you think that we're at risk of a housing bubble, though, if these rates go up too high?
Well, there's always that risk, but I believe we have a lot of people in place right now in this administration, in the Federal Reserve, who, if they're working together, can manage this.
And you've got another rule that you're anticipating, that we're all anticipating, eagerly anticipating, that you're going to rework, the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing rule. This was an Obama-era rule that was designed to strengthen the landmark 1968 Fair Housing Act, which celebrates 50-year anniversary this year. It would require local governments to get federal funds to submit to fair housing assessment. We talked about RAD, but you've said that the AFFH rule will, quote unquote, is suffocating investment in some of our most distressed neighborhoods. When are you going to put out the new rule, and how are you going to rework it?
Well, we hope to have it out, before the end of this year. But, I believe in the concept of affirmatively furthering fair housing, but I think it needs to be done in a more logical way. The way it was being done before is we took a few sentences and expanded into hundreds of pages of rules and regulations, which was very complex, and created a big board with pink dots and orange dots and green and yellow dots, and you move some of the green ones where the pink ones are, and somehow that's supposed to solve segregation.
Sounds like a lot of dots.
Yeah, and it wasn't working, and people were complaining up the wazoo. They're saying, we can't do this, it's too complex. And it's costing us too much money. We don't have the people to be able to do it. So we said, let's do something that actually makes sense. Let's go back and ask ourselves, why are we having the problems with segregation? Why are we having the problems with affordable housing? And it really kind of boils down to the zoning restrictions and the regulatory barriers that are in the way that prevent us from building affordable housing. And there are so many rules and regulations that have been in place for 10, 20, 30, 40, even 100 years that were relevant at the time that are still on the books. And we need to incentivize people to remove those.
Yeah, you're saying it's land use regulations. You know, Secretary Carson, I covered you on the presidential campaign trail. You talked about ending racial inequality, making a conservative argument for that. I also was with you, as one of the reporters with you, and we went to Detroit to visit your home, your childhood home. Omarosa Manigault Newman was there, as well as candidate Donald Trump. And now you're the only African American serving in the president's cabinet. So when you talk about these policies, when you talk about racial inequality, I'm wondering, do you talk about racial inequality with President Trump? Do you talk about diversity in the cabinet with President Trump?
We have talked about those things, but you know, with President Trump, there really isn't any black or white. It's all about green. You know, he's looking at, you know, how do we create an environment that is beneficial for everybody? You know, a rising tide floats all boats. This is the concept that he believes in. And if you look around you, you see it's working. You know, black unemployment is at its lowest level historically. All the parameters that you'd want to see are actually working. We're just not sort of pigeonholing it into one group versus another group.
Quick follow-up on that. Do you agree with all of his rhetoric in terms of how he talks about race?
I always say if two people agree about everything, one of them isn't necessary.
What's the appetite for GSE reform in the lame duck in the next Congress? Or is the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac conservatorship ever going to end?
I certainly hope so. You know, we're in the 10th year at this point. And, you know, it's time to stop some of the exposure of the taxpayers and do something that makes more sense. Should we have some kind of a backstop? Of course it should be a backstop, but we should encourage more private capital to come in between. And I think that's what's going to be happening as we go into this housing finance reform. Obviously, HUD's going to be a big part of that. You know, between FHA and Ginnie Mae, we're looking at $3 trillion. Wow. So we're going to be a big part of that discussion.
Final question for you on the Puerto Rico recovery. I know you've been there multiple times. I know you guys just hired someone from Ernst & Young in terms to oversee and to make sure that there's no that there's transparency on that. What can you update us with the recovery in Puerto Rico?
Well, you know, we've been there for a long time, doing a whole variety of things. 117,000 FHA-backed loans there. Providing people with various financing options to be able to get back on their feet. The moratorium on foreclosures for 361 days, loan forbearance, a whole host of things that we're doing. But more importantly, we've been there analyzing their financial infrastructure to make sure that we do protect the taxpayer money. Our CFO has been over there. A variety of our people have been over there looking at the system, working with them on it. And the first tranche of money, which will be $1.5 billion, obviously we will be looking very carefully at how that is expended and taking account of that when we look at the next $18.5 billion.